It's awesome. Yeah. I'm excited for this season. Get back into competition and friendships that we have and that we share. So, couple of quick things that I would just want to cover. Some rule changes that were voted on. Well, actually, let me back up. First thing to cover is the handbook has been updated. So the state handbook, Tanya and myself and Doug, Shannon Chamberlain, Mike Shackelford and John Oglesby, we sat down and we went through the old handbook, cleaned it up, took redundant parts out. And so
Made it less confusing.
So anyway, part of the handbook at the end section, and this one I would suggest like you have your students review are the event rules. And it's specifically in there, the exact rules that we're using. We're adopting NSDA rules, so whatever they say anyway is what the rules will be. There are, I think, the only exception would be our combined interp category. There's a rubric. So part of the conversation that we've had was mitigating complaints to UHSA about judging, not being qualified to judge. So we've got specific rubrics that will actually be in tab room the judges will use when adjudicating their rounds, which also includes some of those rules that were passed of one that we need to have like a 10 to 15 minute judge training for sure at state. Other rule changes, the substitution rule. So in a partnership debate,
Yes.
if a kid is sick and they competed in that event at region, or somebody else competed in that event at region, they can now sub as the new partner for state. Does that make sense?
Say it one more time.
So let's say you have a policy team, Doug's policy team, one of his kids comes down with something terrible that morning after region. And there's another partnership who couldn't compete because of whatever reason, someone went to prom. The other kid from the other team that their partner went to prom instead can now compete with that partner whose partner is sick. In the event still, and still in the same event, so they're still qualified in the event, but it means that both partnerships are now dead because of that. Qualifying for state is basically showing up at region, right? I mean, for most everywhere, it's like you showed up at region. Yeah, so
There's no in the single when they go Maverick.
they cannot Maverick still, no. Yeah. Still
And
can't
the rule
Maverick.
is intended to be used as a last.
It's a last resort, yeah.
At resort. This isn't, hey, these partnerships didn't work well, so I'm gonna move partnerships. It's designed, the rule is designed for that emergency situation.
And not for the kid. Notice the team that had the kid going to prom wasn't getting to compete already because
So,
going to prom is not
the
a
other,
valid reason to substitute someone in.
the other thing to be aware of is all of our state tournaments are now double entry. With the exception of policy. So you have a policy team, they can't do speech because they have to compete for both dates at state. So, but there will be speech will be on Friday, debates on Saturday. So just plan accordingly as coaches. Yeah, that means double entry at region, or like, I guess regions are somewhat autonomous. They could make decisions.
No, they still have to be double, they still have to qualify at region, so
Right,
they'd have
right.
to double enter at region in order to make state.
Right.
You should run it double
You should
entry.
run it like state.
Here's the thing, if you run 3 rounds in the morning of speech and 3 rounds in the afternoon of debate and your policy all day, you can still do a 1-day tournament. Yeah, it's perfectly viable.
So yeah, all same things.
Correct.
So
Just still can't have more than 30 people attend. So you're still capped, which makes the equity still there because you still can't have more than 30. Two. It's participants, not teams. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
Good clarifications.
yeah, those are some good questions. So anyway, the handbook is on UHSAA. I was just going through it. It's still the grammatic or there's some punctuation errors. I don't know what PLD is, but that's what it says in one understate PLD.
Okay.
So,
I
figure
went
it-
through it, but who knows what they did.
What's that? Yeah, it's policy.
Policy LP.
Anyway, oh wait, never mind. I shouldn't say that one. So, yeah, but just go through, be familiar with the handbook, how,
SPAR is not in there yet because we want the 1 and 2A coaches to help us develop the rubric for that and make sure we get those rules
Yeah.
right. So if you're a 1 and 2A coach, please get with us so we can make sure we get SPAR right in the handbook.
yes.
Because we didn't want to dictate to SPAR what you were doing and then come back and like, wait a minute. And we're like, oh, sorry. So there were no 1 and 2A coaches at our lovely thing. So we're trying. So help us out with SPAR. We appreciate that. So we get it in the handbook for you. Awesome.
Okay. I don't have anything else other than, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, never mind. I do have.
Regions are by your regions. That should depends
Region
on
is
your.
yeah, that's a region decision when your region tournaments are. State dates, correct me if I'm wrong. Second weekend of March would be
4, 5, and
4,
6A.
5, and 6A. The first weekend of March?
Third
Third weekend of March would be 1 through 3A.
1 through 3 is combined again.
And 1 through 3A will be at Ben Lomond High School. Okay,
Where's 4, 5, and 6?
4A is at.
it's a good question. I was going through all my notes. I have.
We will
How
get those
many?
out to you. 5A I know is, or 6A I know is at
6
Bingham.
days at Bingham.
Thank you. Okay.
I'll get you the location of 4 and 5A as soon as I
We know that they're
find it.
somewhere. I just can't find them.
find my notes, so. Okay, oh, yes,
We are passing around the book. Please list your name, email, school, you would be receiving press.
I don't even have.
yeah, and Vaughn, while you're up, do you want to give us all an update on becoming a 501c3?
Oh, yes.
So you have
We're a charitable
So,
organization.
yeah,
Thank you, Vaughn. Woo!
so donations, tax deductible, so yeah,
Make us your favorite charity on Smile that Heaven's on the comment.
so, yeah, and big thank you for doing that, so.
Well, I'm unfortunately, we get the breakouts. We have the fire, breakout session 1, or 1, or 1 is here to 1. Use your sound.
I'm just staying in here all day, so.
And restrooms, there is a restroom right here, or you can go out and turn right and right again, and they're just past the doors, the double doors.
We'll have lunch as well here. We're having what, Neaters?
Yeah.
So
Okay, with that,
we're gonna turn the time.
turn the time
Yeah.
over to,
Let's see first, email.
Oh,
Oh.
yes.
We're not giving emails to the Saturday coaches group. What we're gonna suggest is that you give us your personal email instead of your school email. Because-
districts are starting to
Yeah.
block Gmail.
Yeah, so districts are blocking
Coaches
those
Gmail.
emails and you're not getting them. So you want to send them to you, Connie?
Send them to me because I have all the information of how to go in and change them.
So
So
send your personal email to Tanya so we can get you on that list and get you into the coaches group.
we're working on updating the website to the point that we don't have to, we'll have the membership directory through the website and protect it that way, because right now the membership directory is still through Google, and half of you can't get into the membership directory through Google because Google's who's being Google, you know, and our emails and things like this and access, and we don't want it to be public. I tried linking it on the website and giving you guys a password. That didn't work. So but we don't want your information out there publicly to the world. I can't imagine why you would want some random person texting you and you're like, where did you get my number from? We don't want to give that information out to the world by having it just open there. So we're working on that to get that updated, but the website is also being updated. It has elementary, middle school page, all updated and converted over to it. And we're working on this and we came up with this idea. We need a logo and stuff like this. So we might put out a contest to all the schools. Rachel and I were thinking about this. We should put a contest out all the schools. Maybe we'll give you like free fees to a tournament or something. If your team wins, So we'll get more details out about that, Rachel, and I have to talk a little bit now because we're like, oh, that would be exciting.
Well, now that you mentioned tournament fees.
Oh, tournament fees. There is an
Chat room
update
is
to that
now
too.
Cost, so there is an update on tournament fees. And it's a fee per school is what's going up.
We figured it was cheaper to put a fee up for schools a little bit more per entry rather than per entry. That way you could keep still entering as many students as possible without it costing as much, and that was more equitable.
It's listed in the handbook.
It's $25 a day instead of 15. It went up $10 a day. If there is an issue, please reach out to coaches who are in charge of the tournaments, because sometimes we can help out. But the cost of we get the first 50 free in tab room, and after that it charges them. So it makes it so schools have a burden of paying for the tournaments now that we didn't have before. And so it helps that we up that a little bit to help cover those costs. Yes,
Right? No,
There's still
per
the per student is
fee
$4.
stays the same.
but it's a $4 per student per day. But it's 25 per school instead of 15 per school per day.
Pretty good.
Yeah,
That's the
per
$4,
entry
yeah.
Per day. So
It's
per entry per day.
$4 per entry.
Yeah, so when we
This
were
is the-
discussing the burden, like, it was more equitable just to do a school fee than
Yeah.
hitting every kid.
But let us know, let people running the tournaments know if there's a need or not, because we would rather people come to tournaments most of the time. And if we can help out, we can. We just can't afford to have everyone not paying anything.
Yeah.
At all. So I know this is some people's fundraisers for the year and helps them pay for things. And so that we need to help them out.
While it's in my head, some other event rule changes to be made aware of. They're also in the handbook. Congress now has a direct questioning period or recognition. It's listed as direct questioning. A student can take no more than 30 seconds in that direct questioning, but it's a back and forth between the kid who's going to get recognized on the floor and the speaker. So you might want to adjust how you're teaching Congress with your students so that they're.
If you have questions with that, let me know. Yeah. You can charge less. You can't charge more than that. So yeah, that is up to tournaments. You are correct. Thank you for bringing that up. Or it's TSC.
Yes. Right, so you still have your 2 minutes questioning period, and as a kid gets recognized, they get 30 seconds Up
instead
to
of just,
30 seconds.
yeah. Yes, unless they yielded their time and had more time left, yes.
There also is a caution that those students should make statements. It still should
should
be
be
a back
question.
and forth, but
Yeah.
on the questioning.
Turns congressional debate into debate.
Yep. And then prep time limits were Up-
Maintained from the
maintained
pilots.
the pandemic years, so just be aware that prep time limits are a little bit higher than traditional, an extra minutes, so.
Yep.
It's the only changes I can think of.
Yeah, if there's more, we'll let you know.
Okay. All right, well,
Turn our
we're a
time on.
little quick,
Yeah, it's fine.
but I'd like to turn time over to Eric Brown and former Utah State Legislator.
Great.
We're gonna have
We'll
a
have Doug
proper
introduce.
introduction here.
Yeah, let me just introduce, we're gonna come over here.
Like, if that is not like a crowd right?
Yeah, so those of you who don't know Derek Brown, I asked Derek Brown to come. First of all, he's highly engaging. He's very energetic. He's brilliant. He had the difficult task of organizing. He probably ran the largest parliamentary gathering in the state of Utah with very heated opinions and divisions and things like that. And I haven't seen anybody run it any better than he has. In addition to being a great person and very engaging and knows his parliamentary procedure really well, he is an amazing pianist and very skilled musician. And he's a great asset. So we're glad to have him here for just a little bit of time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you. I couldn't make it in music, in the world of music, and so I did what most musicians do. I went to law school. I like it. So I'm kind of a recovering attorney of sorts. I had to bring this up. Okay, so I have a little background. How many of you have your Robert's rules? Did you bring it with you? Robert's rules? 11. You actually did? Oh, you have it? Oh, I was gonna say, okay, so I actually have 3 of these. Okay, do you know why? So a couple of years ago, I had the misfortune of, can I put it that way? I mean, this is,
Yes.
this is kind of code of silence. No one's recording me, right?
No.
I had the misfortune of being elected the chair of the Utah Republican Party. So weird to have this. This is called rain, right? Is that what this is? Yeah, I mean,
Background white.
background white noise. I know, it's so crazy. I mean, we're not used to having this, but so I mean, and by the way, when anyone who actually runs to be like a party chair, no one sane does it. You either do it because you aren't sane or because you kind of have your arm twisted by certain people. And so I did that, and unfortunately I won. And it really sort of complicated my life. And I know that all of us are from like all these different, like across the political spectrum. And one of the fun things about being the state party chair of the Republican Party is that one of my best friends during this whole process was the Democrat Party chair. Like he and I literally became like really good friends, because if you want to think of an organization like the most dysfunctional organization on the planet that like lives and dies by this, it's a state political party. I mean, it really is. I mean, the infighting is just, it's epic. And well, in fact, and in the Republican Party, I always joked that we had these internal dynamics, and we used to, my Democrat counterpart and I we got to be really good friends for a couple of reasons. One is being a state party chair is sort of like having a root canal every morning, and then occasionally throughout the day as well, depending on the day. I mean, it's like everything is always blowing up. There's always something wrong. You can never make everybody happy. And it's kind of the way political parties are. In fact, when I first got elected Republican Party chair, I had one of my good friends who's a Democrat call up and say, hey, you got to meet the guy who just got elected to be your counterpart. And so I was really hoping that it would be someone totally crazy that I could like just kind of steamroll and beat and that kind of thing, and in terms of elections. And so we went to breakfast, and he was like delightful, like super smart, very engaging. He was an attorney, he was a business owner, very thoughtful, very likable. And my first thought was, dang it, that makes my job harder. But I loved it because what we ended up doing is we had a lot of different media things that we would do together. So as you can imagine, they would have like Channel 4, like Good Things. I mean, they would invite both of us to come and debate. And we're used to this sort of nonsensical talk show format where it's like, who can get the best zinger, right? Who can make who can be most outraged, who can make the most outrageous claim, that kind of thing. And he and I always had this really good back and forth. And part of it, I think, was because we actually had a real friendship. And we also both sort of operated from the idea that it's like there was nothing personal. Like, this is all about ideas. I mean, and this is the world that you guys live in, right? I mean, it's not like none of this stuff is personal. It's all about ideas and getting into ideas. And when you can really get into ideas and think through ideas, all of a sudden, like it doesn't become personal, right? It becomes, and then you're a better thinker. And I've always thought that this is the key to to the extent we have a crisis in America, I think it's incivility. And I think incivility is largely a result of not understanding other people and seeing them as people, and not being able to step in someone else's shoes. And one of the things you do, I love that you have debate that forces them to think on both sides, right? Oh, by the way, the reason I have 3 of these is when I got elected, 3 of these showed up in the mail from Amazon, and they were different people in the Republican Party who said, and pretty much all the things, they said the same thing. This is the single most important thing you need to be successful as a state party chair. And I thought, wait a minute. My job is to run an organization, fund it, get our message out, and help candidates get across the finish line. That's really what a political party does. what in the world is Robert's Rules of Order, 11th edition, you know? I mean, this thing is 716 pages long. So anyway, and the reason I tell you that is because really, political parties are really dysfunctional and they weaponize parliamentary procedure. Have you ever seen that or heard of? I mean, that's really what it is. They weaponize it. And I mean, I still am like, I mean, there's a trick to it though, because 716 pages of rules is like, wait a minute, how in the world do you make this work? So one of the funny things about Robert's Rules is in the Republican Party, we have this like people have taken infighting and the circular firing squad concept to a whole new level. And the reason they do it, and I don't know if this is like something that you've seen or heard about, but like in the 2017 convention, we had a state Republican Party convention. And one of the things that happened was we had a number of people who used parliamentary procedure in an offensive, weaponized way. And what they would do is they would make motions deliberately designed to slow things down and then force debate on things that were just inane. And so, yeah, like you said, and they were stupid. I mean, like let's, taking 3 hours to adopt an agenda, for instance. And I'm not joking. That's the kind of nonsense that happened. And Doug's over there. Were you there at that one?
Yes.
I mean, it was, and so here's my question. Why would a group do that? I'm just curious. Any idea? Why, what's the benefit of just dragging it out?
To stall the vote.
To stall the vote, because if you take a vote later in the day, why does that change the impact?
Well, the people do.
Exactly. And not to get too political, but who leaves? What kind of people leave?
People that have lives.
People that have lives. Exactly. Exactly. Because it started at like 10 in the morning, and by like 4 in the afternoon, you've got like I think it was probably 10 to 15% that had gone. And then by the time they actually got to the vote, ironically on Mitt Romney, because he was running in a convention, by the time the vote took place, which I think it was like at 5:30 in the evening, something like 20 to 25% of the thousands of people who showed up that morning were gone. And then Mike Kennedy beat him slightly by, well, I think 3, it was like 52, 49, 51 or something. Do you think that might have impacted the vote? Yeah. So, I mean, really, it all came down to the parliamentary procedure. And so the infighting is really a function of that. I was on the KSL once with I don't know if you ever listened to Boyd Matheson, who I love. I mean, Boyd is a great thinker and like the classic person who is a phenomenal debater. He moderates a lot of different political debates. And even though he's politically more conservative, people across the spectrum like him because he's very thoughtful, he's very even-handed. And we were talking one time about these dynamics on KSL. And he said, Derek, I get the impression that there are maybe 5 political parties in Utah, and you're the chair of 4 of them. And I thought, that's actually a good analysis. But anyway, so back to kind of what you're doing. I've never actually done this process. And it's so cool because it's a lifelong learning the skills they learn. In fact, I have to tell you, yesterday I was on, my background, by the way, is I'm an attorney. So I went to law school, and then I practiced law in DC for a number of years, came back here. I've been in the House of Representatives and do more sort of government relations type work, which is, I love. I mean, law, I know you're an attorney, so I don't need to cast aspersions on attorneys, but I did love the practice of law. I sort of joke sometimes that I'm a recovering lawyer. And so I love what I do now, which is government relations and kind of business and law and politics all meshed into one. So that my background is doing that. So I've never actually done the debate part, but like yesterday I was on with an attorney in excuse me, in Manhattan, and we were going through a really difficult legal issue that dealt with personalities and law firms and a company that was kind of imploding, and we were going through all these different things. He whips out a couple of quotes. We need to remember this, and I was like, that was good. He goes, my high school debate coach taught me that. And this guy's probably in his mid-40s. And I'm like, really? And it didn't surprise me that this attorney who I've worked with for several months, who is really smart, but also really good interpersonally. And I mean, it didn't surprise me that he learned these skills. I didn't learn them in high school. It was a little bit of a struggle. My first experience doing anything like this was in law school doing moot court, which is, I mean, you know what that's like, right? I mean, I had never done it. And so I was signed up with somebody to be a partner who he knew what he was doing because he had done high school debate. I didn't. So it was brand new to me, the whole concept of how you do it. And they assigned you in moot court to write a paper on a particular topic, but then you've got to write, you've got to understand both sides, right? I mean, that's critical. And in fact, I remember the debate topic, and this is like 20 plus years ago. So this will show that the topic was whether the full faith and credit clause of the US Constitution would require a state to validate a marriage, a same-sex marriage from another state. So at that time, Hawaii was looking, no state had done it, but Hawaii was looking at doing it. So that was the issue, is under full faith and credit, does it apply? And so they assigned us a topic, and mine was I wrote on the topic of no, it wouldn't, but then you show up and they flip a coin and they go, all right, you're here and you're here. And so like, it's hard because you have to get in that different framework. And that for me was probably the single best experience I ever had, because it taught me that somebody who might feel differently than me was not, they weren't dumb, they weren't closed-minded, they were somebody who saw things from a different lens. And in fact, my most memorable moment, by the way, so the night before, no, it was 2 or 3 nights before we sort of did a practice, and I was terrible because I had never done this. And I was so bad that and you've probably seen this with students that stand up, they don't know what they're doing because they don't know the framework for thinking. And I had this friend of mine who had done high school debates, coached me through, okay, you know all the arguments, you just need to structure. If you get asked this, you just go to this argument. If you get asked this, go to this argument. And long story short, I won the moot court, which was a lot of fun because I did not expect that. But my most frightening moment was in the final round. I'm looking out, and they structured it so you're down there and there's all these students going up. There were hundreds of students. And then in the middle, they had the judges. They were out there like you would in a real appellate court process. So you're looking at all these students and then the judges, and they're just grilling you with questions. What about this? What about that? And, you know, they flip the coin. Okay, you're writing, you're arguing this, you're arguing that. And we had several rounds, and I was going back and forth and back and forth. And I remember arguing, responding to one of the questions. And I look out there, and near the top, I can see my wife, and who is like so good. I mean, she's a natural debater. I'm not. She is so good at this stuff. And I see her, and her face is like this. And I'm like, and my thought was like, and then I realized I was arguing the wrong side. Like, because I had gone back and forth so many times, I didn't know where I was. And then I was able to like, what I actually meant to say, and I was able to bring it back. And the whole thing was just, oh my gosh, it was really frightening how it all worked out. But anyway, so in the end, that worked out. It worked out great. But so one of the things I learned about parliamentary procedure when I was the state party chair was that it can't be weaponized, but it's useful in terms of running a meeting. I know you run meetings, and it's the process and then the substance. And if you get the process right, then the substance can be more right than it would otherwise. You know what I'm saying? It's a natural thing. You do. Doug was saying you also do a Congress where you have kind of the process of debating bills and that sort of thing. One of the things I learned in the House of Representatives, well, 2 things. One is that one of the things I learned is that surprisingly, you would think that Democrats and Republicans fight all the time and they hate each other. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, some of my best friends were Democrats that I disagreed with all the time. But part of it was the fact that there was this give and take. And in fact, I remember one day where I was about to vote for a bill, and one of my Democrat colleagues says, hey, do you realize this will do X, Y, Z? And I'm like, no. He's like, yeah, think about this. And he started laying out his arguments, and it hit me like something that I had never thought about. And I thought, wait, I can't vote for this. Wait, that can't be right. And as I look at it, you know, I realized my dumb Democrat colleague was totally right. And I just was like, wait, and I always would joke about him. I'm like, how can someone be right? It's by this Brian King. who's the House Minority Leader, and a dear friend of mine. And I would always joke with him about how he's not just wrong most of the time, but it's like statistically inconceivable that he's so wrong so often. Well, he laid out some arguments, and I realized I can't vote for this. I mean, it's not the right policy. But part of that, I think, comes from this idea that you have of respecting how other people think and going, okay, just because somebody is of a different political party or any sort of dynamic, that's totally fine. And we all have something to learn. And the process also works. That's the other thing I learned in the legislature. Oh, by the way, I was going to say, most bills, I think maybe 70, how many percent are actually unanimous votes?
Most.
Really, it's 80, like are unanimous votes. And it's because for the most part, people do get along and the process works. And it's a long, convoluted process to get a bill all the way to the end. And in fact, my very first session in the legislature, we had the debate topic that we had one day for my Judiciary Committee hearing was a bill that, and no joke, this was the bill. It was from a representative up in northern Utah who introduced a bill making it legal to shoot a feral cat if it's on your property. Okay, so there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, a lot of cities don't allow you to shoot a firearm in the city. But the most interesting question was, how can you tell if the cat's feral? A, it's your neighbors. B, you don't like cats. What was the guy from Parks and Rec? He said any dog under 50 pounds is a cat, and a cat is useless, right? What's his name? Yes, exactly. That was the quote. He's like, any dog under 50 pounds is useless. No, any dog under 50 pounds is a cat. Cats are pointless. So I mean, so we had this Judiciary Committee hearing where the topic of debate was whether it should be legal. I wouldn't suggest one, by the way, for your debate topics, but whether it should be legal to shoot a feral cat. And the real issue was, how do you know if it's feral? And so you have all these lawyers on the Judiciary Committee debating how do you know if a cat's feral? And the best we could come up with was you look in their little eyes and this thing is feral. And in the end, and we watered the bill down and we added, we hemmed and hawed, and this happens a lot when you have a really dumb bill, but you think it's going to pass, you use parliamentary procedure to add amendments to it, to water it down. So, you can only shoot feral cats on Tuesdays, or that are white or male, or that's probably a protected class, right? But so what was funny is it did pass the committee. It went to the full House. It got watered down further, passed again. Have you ever watched the Colbert Report? Stephen Colbert. He did a whole thing on this particular Utah bill that was hysterical. I mean, it was he just skewered us left and right, and it was well-deserved and it was hysterical. And one of those moments where we could laugh at ourselves. Well, here's the funny part. It goes over now to the Senate. Okay, and you know what the Senate does with this very controversial bill, where there were all these news stories and everything? You know what they did? They went, we don't have time to do. That was it, and the bill died. So my point is, the process actually, it actually works, which I as much as we laugh about how the process is long and convoluted and a pain in the neck, it's designed to be such, because all these House members who had a vested interest in shooting feral cats, you get to the Senate. Oh, and I can tell you something funny that happened, no joke. In the middle of this, my wife runs a recording studio, and they have a big facility in Midvale. And in the middle of this, no joke, I got a call from the office manager who said, you're not going to believe this, but we have a colony of feral cats burrowed underneath the building. What do I do? I mean, I can't shoot them. I'm like, no, hang on. Give me a week and I'll answer that question. Well, and the real problem was they had a cat lady who adopted them and was feeding them, going onto the property and feeding these cats. And so anyway, the whole thing was just comical, but my point is that the process actually works. And when push comes to shove, it's the kind of thing where understanding the process, then if you know how to utilize it, there's power with that. And the legislature uses a modified form of parliamentary procedure that's actually more simple. I mean, it really is. You can learn it pretty quickly, and it's designed to make things go more smoothly. And it's also designed in a way that I wish like political parties could do. And it's designed so that you can't gum things up with long, motions to adopt agendas. And when I was the state party chair, and I'll let you in on a little secret here, my job, I really did, I did like a crash course in parliamentary procedure. Like I learned everything I could about it. But I also had a professional parliamentarian who was literally next to my side the whole time. And she was amazing. And he's like, how people make fun of lawyers and they have lawyer jokes? Well, people hate lawyers until they need one. And then all of a sudden, your lawyer is your best friend and the person who walks you through difficult situations. And that parliamentarian name is Jessica Christopher. She's a professional parliamentarian. She's outstanding. She's very even keel. And she literally, she's got this thing all but memorized. Like there were times when I'd be like, well, should we do this and this? And she'd be like, well, in the 10th edition of Robert Rules, they allowed it, but this is the 11th. And, we can't do it. We have to do it this way. And I was like, who knows that? but the scary thing was for me, and this is what kept me up at night is the idea of being in front of, being in the Maverick Center in front of 4,000 people on the Jumbotron, having knowing I needed to get through a certain number of things on the agenda, and knowing that there were a certain group of people whose job it was to make sure that it started at 8 a.m. and by 8 p.m. we still hadn't voted on anything, because they knew that would affect the outcome. And that was the biggest concern that we had all along. And so how do you work through that? And here was my secret. First of all, there was two things. One is there is a trick to parliamentary procedure to make it look like you're not using parliamentary procedure. You know what I'm saying? Like you want to look like you're not following a book. This is procedure, and you want to make it really natural. So Jessica kind of helped me work on that. But the other thing we did that is my little secret, and at first I felt like I was cheating, but she said, everyone does this. Every person who runs a major meeting does this. And that is, I had a script. And it was literally on a three-ring binder. And the night before each of these meetings, we had central committee meetings where it was the same thing. And I did this 7 or 8 times with her, where the night before the meeting, there's all this preparation going into it and organizational stuff and catering and whatever. But for me, the single most important thing was sitting down across the table at my house with Jessica, and she'd be like, okay, here's what it is. And we'd start and be like, okay, we need to adopt the agenda. What are the possible parliamentary tricks that could come up here? Okay, Derek, here are 5 things that I see as possibilities that people could use. If any of these things happen, then we walk through each one of them. If number 3 happens, flip to page 20 quickly. Here's the tab, and then here's the different responses. And it was anyway, it was my first meeting. It went without a hitch. And she had thought through, the parliamentarian had thought through every conceivable thing that could happen. Did you ever, as a kid, read those books, Choose Your Own Adventure? Do you remember those? Where it's do you want to go in the cave or not? If you do, go to page 53. That's literally, she had this thing designed. It was awesome. And so I'm telling you my tricks of the trade only because apparently this is very common in that industry. And so, I mean, it worked out incredibly well. And then during the meeting, she'd sit next to me and say, when someone would say, well, point of inquiry, should we do, we need to do this. And she'd say, no, actually, that's not me. And then I would just say, no, it's not. And here's why, and walk through it. So anyway, the whole thing was just, it was nerve-wracking to the nth degree. So it's one thing to debate a topic, and to know generally what can come up. It's another thing to know there's a group of people out there waiting to trick you. And so there were some sleepless nights. And the only thing that gave me comfort was knowing that my friend Jeff, who's running the Democrat Party, had exactly the same thing. And the dynamics were very similar. But anyway, rather than going through all the different parliamentary things, because you kind of use a different set of things for the students. I mean, the bottom line is these are life skills, skills that the kids are going to use forever. I wish that I had done it in high school. I wish I had gotten better at it. It wasn't until really that moot court experience where I got like all of a sudden I got sort of more confidence. And I always wondered, and when I was running for the House and I was in the House and was party chair, I always wanted to get to the point in my life where I could stand up in front of a group of people, and in the lead up to that, I wouldn't be nervous. And that's never happened. So I guess that's normal. And maybe you tell your kids that, like if they're nervous, it's like that's the way, like I think that's just what happens, right? I mean, and part of it is that that's what gets you in the frame of mind to be thinking and to be ready and that sort of thing. So anyway, so thank you for what you do. I mean, I was just thinking yesterday about that comment the attorney made to me, is like, it was my high school debate coach. I mean, that is the reason that like I am doing what I'm doing, and I think that the answer, honestly, to the main issue we have in our society right now, this problem of incivility, is the ability to dig into ideas and not look at other human beings as the problem. And I mean, the worst debaters and the worst politicians are the ones who take things personally or make it about the other person. And you see that all the time. The best ones are the ones that say, look, here's the problem I have with that idea. You know what I'm saying? Whenever you see someone on Fox or CNN or whatever that starts, well, you, like, I'm sorry, like if you're me, you've lost me. Because I mean, chances are they're criticizing the other person for their dumb idea, but that dumb idea is probably shared by 80 million people who are not all dumb. So once we get that in our mind that people think differently, I think that's how we have to go forward. When I had my very first meeting with all the Central Committee of the Republican Party, which is like 180 people, and think of it as the most dysfunctional family on the planet, with every kind of personality you can imagine. I gave them all in that first meeting a copy of a book that I highly recommend. It's by a guy named Arthur Brooks. And he used to run the American Enterprise Institute. He's now an instructor at Harvard. And he used to talk a lot about politics. He writes for the New York Times, and he talks more about happiness. And like his point is, life is really hard and it's really complicated. And the real problem is that people aren't very happy. And here's how I mean, that sounds really trite and kitschy, but I mean, really, it's like he talks about how to be more happy. And part of what he talked about in this book, it was called Loving Your Enemies. And the idea was, if we stop looking at other people as human beings, then our society falls apart. We need to look at the ideas, right? In fact, he makes the case at one point. He said, 95% of Americans statistically are very uncomfortable with where we are headed in terms of the type of dialogue. And then he said, what's really interesting is, he goes, for those of you doing math, who are the other 5%? Like, what's their problem? Well, and the problem is that 5% has a massive say in media, in our institutions. And not just a say, but a lot of people in that 5% have a vested interest in us not being able to debate effectively. Right. And I think the more that we can debate effectively, in fact, he uses the phrase, I'm going to paraphrase him, but I think I may get it right. He says, we have lost the art of disagreeing agreeably. And if there's one thing that you teach in debate, it is how to disagree agreeably and not make it personal and make it about the issues. And so to the extent that we learn that skill and that you're able to teach that and reinforce that, I think that's the solution. I mean, so many of the best thinkers in our country are across the political spectrum saying the same thing. We need to get back to ideas and being able to disagree in an effective way. And I think that's what you teach. And that's why I think it's one of the most critical skills. So anyway, on that note, those are kind of my thoughts. So thank you for what you do. Do you want to do any questions, or I mean, we can just go to your breakouts or whatever you want. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for the time. Is that or?
You want to take a few questions?
Another way that we can get you simplify the version of our procedures you actually use. Is there a way that we can have access to teach that to our students?
Yeah, I mean, I can send you kind of what we used, a very modified form. One of the things, the other thing, okay, since we're like confessing here, this is kind of like therapy. Actually, funny enough, my co-chair, the guy who's the Democrat chair, Jeff, and I, when we get together, we call it was chair therapy, but we called it therapy. So I'd be like, okay, we're gonna have a therapy session. Okay, therapy session. Yeah, the Pancake House on 8 a.m. on Thursday. And we joked that we were gonna bill each other because we were both attorneys. And, but yeah, there is a modified form of that. But one of the things I did, since I'm like just being really honest with you, in addition to the script, when I had a major convention and I knew that there were certain people that were gonna try and gum things up, we need to adopt the rules for the convention. And then, you know what I'm saying? And then, well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend Rule 8B, subparagraph C, and insert the word, and when you hear that, and you're a normal human being sitting in the Maverick Center, what do your eyes do? Oh my gosh, I'm going to pop over it. So what I actually did is I had an entire group of people that were prepared to make parliamentary motions at precisely the right time, the right location. And they were staged all around the Maverick Center. And literally when the time came to adopt that, I would have someone, and I knew who I could call on, because the one authority I had as the chair was that I didn't have to call whoever was next in line. And I could call, and I could, somebody, if I wanted someone to speak, I could point them out from wherever. And so, I mean, in fact, one of the funniest moments of the whole convention was the next person in line was someone who's going to make a ridiculous motion, and I knew it, and it was going to cause us an hour delay. And about 7 or 8 behind him in the line was my wife. And I knew she knew what was going on because she'd watched this prep. And so I said, hey, just so you know, one of the powers that the chair has, not many, but one of the few that I have is I can call on anyone, not just the next person in line. And I see my wife back there. And if for the sake of marital harmony, I probably should call on her, don't you think? Everyone's like, oh yeah, they're all clapping. And she was perfect. We hadn't even scripted it. I mean, but she was perfect. But I guess my point is that it is kind of a, it's very, a lot of times it's scripted. And by the way, the National Republican Convention is not just scripted like to the minute, it's scripted to the second. And they'll have like 38 things on the agenda. My very first meeting, they had like 30 plus things on the agenda. And it was a 90-minute meeting. And I'm like, and it ended at noon and my flight was at 2:30. And I was like, oh boy. And I'm on the Delta app because there's no way I'm gonna make the flight. And my friend who was there with me, who had been through this a lot, he's like, Derek, like these guys are parliamentary experts. Just don't worry about it. I'm like, you sure? That's a lot of work to do in 90 minutes. And it was just boom, 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 boom. They knew exactly what to do. It was scripted. It was easy. So anyway, but yes, I can get you that because there are very specific things that you can use to ensure that the process is not, that the process doesn't hold the substance captive or hostage.
For us, would that translate?
Yeah, I think what we use is already fairly simple.
We have our orders of the day, and the NSDA has their rules of order that are the most commonly used parliamentary procedures, but I think it's always a value to give our kids real life. So this is what we do. Here's how they do this in the legislature, and we can always translate it over so they can see where this goes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Not that learn skills that are transferable.
Oh, wow.
Right,
What did you
yeah.
say?
The nice thing about student Congress is like, I've been on like little library boards and things like that, and they all use some form of parliamentary procedure. Usually you don't have gamesmanship going on in those, it's just like your people, but it's like how you organize a big group that have diverse ideas and how you are able to move through issues, and you have to be able to stay legislature, because if not, you could spend 3 hours trying to debate one bill and you never get anything done, and you've got to get through business. And so they by necessity have kind of a modified version, and probably would prefer for us to try to do that in our classes a little bit.
Yeah.
Like getting
Well,
something,
and
getting
it's-
some authority, and like having them go through that process.
We do once a week.
Okay, yeah.
Love it. And if you ever, I mean, he's up at the legislature during the session. I'm up there because I work up there. I mean, I'd be happy if you have a group of students. I'd be happy to spend an hour with them and go to like any one of the committee hearings with just an eye towards the parliamentary aspect. The legislature does a much better job than just Roberts generally of stripping out the potential for one person to hijack a meeting and take it forever. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't do that as much. I forgot what it's called. It's a modified form of Roberts, but they have some Flemings, or I forgot the name of it. There's some form of it, but yeah, I mean, that would be, few people are there for the process. Most are there for the substance of the bills, but yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to talk with any students and walk them through. Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
If anybody wants to come sit with me on the floor during session, give me a call, we can pull up a chair and sit next to me. You know the way I go.
You'll have like 20 of us sitting there by him.
Yeah, there's a yes button and a no button. And if he reaches for the yes, you can't grab his hand and pull it back. I mean, you can try. He's a big guy though, so I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, so maybe moving from parliamentary procedure, question about your argument for resurrecting more civility in our political discourse, making our disagreements more agreeable, which is obviously admirable, something we all try as teachers. As part of that argument, you argued that one way to do that is to remove the personal from the flip, right? Politics, disagreements don't need to be personal. And was wondering if you maybe interrogate that for us, because I'm not so sure you're right. One of the insights of the 60s and 70s, I think the second wave feminist movement was their slogan, personal is political, which is the opposite of what you're arguing.
exactly.
And I'm thinking about as a teacher in my classroom, not only did that slogan come into mind, I thought of the students, I thought of specific scenarios. I'm thinking of a non-binary student having a conversation about these transgender issues that are so hot button now. How is that student supposed to make that not personal? A young woman who's been sexually assaulted, God forbid, might be pregnant, God forbid, and we're having conversations about abortion for obvious reasons after the Dobbs decision.
Absolutely.
Think about a devoutly Christian student discussing this football coach from Washington, having prayers on the football field. Those students can't make those things not personal. And so I guess maybe if you can interrogate what, if you do believe we should make it not personal, how do we do that? Or if you agree that politics is inherently personal, how do we maintain civility and teach civility to our students while acknowledging that our politics are inherently and increasingly
I
personal?
think that's what you just said is the key. I mean, there is a personal impact to all these decisions, right? And that's why it is so controversial. And that's why people feel so strongly, is because everything we do has a personal impact. I mean, the Dobbs impact, I mean, it was felt, it reverberated wide and large, I mean, all across the country, right? Every one of these things has a personal impact. But when what I would like to do, what I would argue is separating the personal impact from attacking a person for who they are. And that's for me, I think if we can make that distinction, then I think we have a more productive dialogue. You know what I'm saying? In high school as well, I think if you have like a debate where you're going back and forth, it's one thing to say, well, here's the impact, here's why it's wrong, here's why I disagree, or here's why it is right. But if you say you're a bad person because you do this, I think that's what I'm referring to, is we do hear that. And I think like talk shows and stuff will exacerbate that, where they'll basically say, you know, you'll hear phrases like, well, of course you'd say that because, or, you know, those kinds of things. So I think to the extent that we can take that out, but still acknowledge there is an impact on all these decisions on people. I mean, by definition, I mean, that's what we do in legislatures, is we make decisions that are going to have impact on people who aren't necessarily there to explain how it's going to impact them. And so that's why I think the ideas are so hard. Is that kind of, because, you know what I'm saying? I think that to the extent that we make it personal about another individual, I think that our sort of end result isn't as productive. You know what I'm saying? And I think all we do is sort of throw gasoline on the fire, whereas we can separate it. I mean, like I had this debate with my Democrat counterpart. I mean, we debated these issues all the time. They would have us do presentations to different students, and people were startled that we weren't just like yelling at each other. And then we'd actually say, we're actually friends. And you see the students go, you are? We came here for like a fireworks show and you're friends? Well, I mean, because you'd take an issue, one of those really difficult, like personal issues, and then we would go back and forth on it. But it wasn't, well, you believe that because, you know what I'm saying? Because for me to say that implies that I also know his motives, and how would I know that? You know what I'm saying? And so that's the hard thing, but I get what you're saying. I mean, the reality is they're deeply personal issues, and the most controversial issues in politics have a personal impact. And so, I mean, that's what I would recommend, is seeing if you can help students separate that. So you're focusing on like like the impact the Dobbs decision has, as opposed to those class members who either agree or disagree and putting them in a camp and vilifying or supporting, you know what I'm saying? And that's hard. I mean, and you're right, it's not easy. In fact, I was telling Doug, I had a law school professor who did this really well because he was very, well, it was during the semester I had this law class, it was a constitutional law class, was when Bill Clinton was being impeached. And he was the guy on CNN arguing in favor of the impeachment and for why high crimes and misdemeanors should be interpreted in a way to impeach him. And so the students in the classes like kind of knew where he was politically. And so there's a whole other discussion, right, about that, about not letting your students kind of know where you are, because it's really about ideas. It's not about you. And he would do that, and students would ask him specific legal questions, kind of trying to highlight their position, which they knew was not his position. And his response, I loved his response. And for me, that was one of my other just critical learning moments in life, was watching him go, okay, that's a good point. And in fact, you're in good company because Justice Breyer said exactly the same thing in the Jamestown decision. In fact, here's how he said it. So that's a good point. And in fact, another point is, and then he brings something up further along those lines and say, so you probably agree with that as well. Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And so the idea was showing that the student, it wasn't a personal issue with the student. The student had a really great idea and they were in good company, very smart, well-known individuals, agreed with them. And he would also kind of show in a very kind of humble way that he understands their position even better than they do. And the fact that they believe the way they do or view it that way is perfectly fine. And, you know, and understandable. So anyway, that's the dialogue. I would highly recommend Arthur Brooks. The other book that is fantastic on this very issue is called Them. Have you read that? What's that? No, that's called Ben Sass. So he's a Nebraska senator, and that was kind of his.
Not political, but it's
What's that?
got a political background.
Yeah, he was a university
Not
professor before.
He's a university professor.
Yeah. And that was his whole point, is we divide ourselves into us versus them. And what we like to do is categorize someone into them. And the problem is it degrades the debate, but it also, how do I put this? It also takes away from us the burden of having to think. Because if you know where somebody is, then you know, and you can pigeonhole them into something, then you know what they're like, and you can then know what to think about. You don't have to think about it, right? I mean, and that's the other thing I think we need to, as a society, move away from, because people can't be pigeonholed into little groups, because we're all unique, we're all different, we all have different ways of looking at things. But anyway, you can tell I'm passionate about this, and I love this because these are the hardest questions, you know, that we have. So I felt like I was rambling. Did that kind of get to what you're thinking about?
Arthur Brooks has good paper called On the Edge of the Inside. On the Edge of the Inside. Anyway, he wrote for, it goes for kind of this theory, but real quick, how it's more beneficial to be consider yourself as an insider, but see the other. He likens it to being the guy next to the door. You can see the other door, you know, so you listen to what they are.
Well, and I've seen him. He tends to be, Brooks is far more conservative than not. And I watched him with a group of students at the University of Utah a couple of years ago, who came in like loaded to bear. And he, first of all, charmed them all. I mean, he walked out with a group of students who thought he was delightful, because for him, it was all about the ideas. And he made it clear, he understood exactly where they were coming from. And they were smart and capable and thoughtful for believing the way they did. And he wanted them to also think about another way of things. And if you can do it in a way that disarms people and lets them know you actually do care, like you really, and not just like put on a I care face, but like truly, like this matters, you care. I mean, I care about how you think. And I mean, like that interaction I had with the House Minority Leader, where I was like, oh, you and your crazy, oh, wait a minute. You're right. I hadn't thought of it. You know what I'm saying? And my relationship with him changed at that moment too, because he realized that I wasn't just faking like, that I really respected his opinion, even if I disagree with him. He knew that I actually did. So we need, we need more of that. And I just think these are the skills, I mean, the skills you're teaching are probably more so than any other class. In fact, my attorney friend yesterday said he didn't take debate class in high school. He goes, yeah, we didn't have a debate class. It was like a, what do you call it, club? It was a club that he didn't get credit for, but changed his life. So anyway, it looks like it's 10, so we probably need to wrap up, but thank you. It's been fun to be with you.